I'm at the University of Eindhoven. I just gave a talk about human augmentation. What is human augmentation? What are technologies? And what's the impact and ethics?
The next presenter, from whom I think we can still learn a lot, we invited him here to TUE to spread more awareness and knowledge about human augmentation. He's a biohacker, he's a futurist, he studied at the University of Groningen, business administration and journalism, so I think he's a perfect candidate to make this speech here. He's a host of the podcast Supermens, the author of 2 books, one of which is here, also Supermens, and the second one of biohacking, and he's a guest lecturer at TUE. So give it up to Peter Joosten. Success.
All right, let me start with a story. I could smell the mud and the dirt, and in the distance I could hear ricochets of gunfire. And I could also see the enemy through the bushes and the trees. And there is Richard. He's tall, red hair, he's our commander. Peter, you're fat, you're slow, you're useless. You're fired from my army. Oh, I was so devastated. It's March 1992. I'm 8 years old and I just got fired from my army while playing soldier in the woods. So I went back home, crying in my bed, and while I was dozing off for a good night of sleep, I had a fantasy. My fantasy was that I was a sort of super soldier with prosthetic legs, with bionic eyes, and also that I could heal very quickly from my wounds. And now, about 30 years later, I'm actually not a superhuman or super soldier, but it is my full-time profession to give keynote presentations, to give webinars about this topic of human enhancement, human augmentation. And I write articles about it. I wrote a couple of books about this topic. I also make a podcast, and I'm also having a YouTube channel. So if you're interested in this, at the end of my presentation, I will share a link where you can download the presentation, and there are also links to my books, to my YouTube channel, etc. And all this revolves about the idea, how can we update and augment and upgrade ourselves as human beings? So before I get into the technology and the ethics and the impact, let's start with a definition. Well, this is a definition from a paper from 2019, if I remember correctly, from a couple of Finnish authors, Rakolinen, Jari Littmanen, Kimi Rakonen. Sorry if there are Finnish people in the room. And I put the emphasis on the most important elements in this definition. It's like Ben also told, it's about senses you can augment, but it's also about, not really bold in this one, but it's about sensing, action, and cognitive abilities. So what are some examples? Because I write about this topic, I investigate this topic, I'm really fascinated by this topic, but it did not stop there for me. I also tried to augment myself. So I have a capability which I think that none of you here or maybe people watching have. So I'm a sort of a human guinea pig, and we're going to see what that is. I'm here at the coffee shop and I'm going to pay with my hands, so not with cash or with cards, but just with my hand. So now we're going to see a little demonstration. Geen kaart.
Ja, super, dankjewel.
So I have 2 implants. In my left hand I have an implant with my contact information. So you can scan me afterwards if you want to have my contact information. And in my right hand, as you could see in the video, I have an implant which allows me to pay for my coffee and my groceries. So I'm curious, what do you think of this type of augmentation? So we do a small exercise, also for the people that are watching this on the live stream. I want to ask you to all stand up, please. And also, if you're behind your laptop or your smartphone, so in the blauwe zaal, everybody's standing up. And my question to you is, would you like to have such an implant? If not, you can sit down, and if so, you can keep standing up. So make your decision. And in the chat, you can choose 0 or 1. And I think about 30 or 40% in the room is still standing. So thank you very much. You can all sit down. I'm curious, Gijs, do you got some 0s and 1s on the chat, or mostly 0s and just 1s? So there's a difference between the people who are here and in the room. So I'm just curious to pick one. I'm curious about why did you choose to have such an implant or not. So I'm just to throw this random one in the audience. So did you want to have an implant or not?
I was going for an implant.
Yeah.
I think it would be an amazing way to just pay with your hands, and if you can like share your contact info by shaking someone's hand or something like that.
Yeah, okay, thank you for your answer. You can throw it back. And what's your name, by the way? Sam. Sam, if you go and visit me after the presentation, you get a copy of my book. So a round of applause for Sam. So I just asked you a question if you want to have a certain implant yourself or a certain augmentation yourself, but now I want to do a small thought experiment. So I want to ask you not if you want to have something yourself, but in general, should we allow a certain augmentation to be produced and also be used in society? So the first one is, what if there's an implant, not an implant to pay, but an implant for snipers to increase their accuracy, so they become better at sniping people? Just with a quick raise of hands, who says, well, we should allow these kinds of implants? Well, in the blauwe zaal, it's about 50%, I would say. Now another thought experiment. What if we have the same kind of technology, but we give it to surgeons? So surgeons improve their accuracy and they perform their surgery better. In that way, save more lives. Who's in favor of that kind of implant? No, that's almost 90%. So that's really interesting. And in the last couple of years, numerous institutions surveyed the general public about their opinion on human augmentation technologies. The most recent one is by PEW Research from the US. It's from, I think, 2 weeks ago. You also had Kaspersky Labs in 2020. But I also like the work of the Rathenau Institute from 2012, because they did not only do a survey, but they also did an analysis. What are factors that make that people are in favor of an augmentation technology or against such a technology? Well, give you some obvious examples. If you're familiar with the technology because your friends and relatives are using it, you are generally in favor of it. And also, if there's enough information about the risks and benefits, you are also probably more in favor of the technology. But what's also interesting is if a technology is more permanent and invasive, like an implant, people are more against it, in contrast to, for example, something that is temporary and non-invasive. You can also think of the difference between an implant and a sleeve that you saw by Team HART. That's the difference, and people are more in favor when it's temporary and non-invasive. But also, and that's why I did the small thought experiment with you, is the social weight of an augmentation. So in general, people are more in favor of a technology if it allows a surgeon to perform her operations better compared to when you have the same kind of implant for a sniper to do his or her work better. So these are a couple of factors to take into account when we talk about the public acceptance of human augmentation. So I talked about implants, but I also want to share some other augmentation technologies with you. And the first one is, right now, when we communicate with computers, we type on the keyboard, we swipe, maybe you'll also talk with your device or your smartphone. But the next revolution in human-to-computer or human-to-machine interaction are so-called brain-computer interfaces. Well, I also have one device by NextMind. So you put it, like you can see in the clip, on the back of your head. And it translates with EEG sensors some of my brain signals into operations for the computer. And I can make music with it, and I can also play these games just with the power of my thoughts. And this is actually my favorite game. It's called Platformer, and I can move the little platform with my thoughts. So I think my prediction is, my expectation is that for certain professions in the future, we will see more usage of brain-computer interfaces. And what's also interesting is that this company, NextMind, which is based in Paris, France, has been acquired by Snap, like Snapchat, last week. So there's also the prediction that in the future, when you wear the Snap goggles, glasses, then they can also analyze your brain. And when you're thinking of a forest, you suddenly see a forest in your screen appearing. At least that's a possible scenario. But so these brain-computer interfaces are about analysis of the brain, but we can also influence and tinker with the brain. For example, with the use of small electrical currents or also magnetic pulses. This is a consumer device called the Tink, and you put it on your temple, and that has a small strip, and then you put it behind the back of your ear, and it sends a small electrical current via your skull. And yeah, I tested it. It works quite well, but I prefer a cup of espresso. But maybe in the future we could see these kinds of applications also in certain work occupations, or like to combat fatigue, for in this example. But think about it, you can have technology on the outside of the skull, but then it needs to get through the skull and through a tiny layer of water. We can also go directly into the skull. That works even better. And the creators of South Park already thought of a really interesting use case of this application. Well, sorry for the vulgar language, that's entirely my responsibility. So that's about brain implants. And for the last type of category, I want to talk about senses, like also in the introduction by Ben. And I want to think about your vision, about your optics. For example, do you trust your eyesight? Well, this is one example. This is not a video, but this is an image. This is an optical illusion called the peripheral drift illusion. And for example, if you focus on one part of the image, then you will see that the image stops moving. So you can try it for yourself. Probably, I see a lot of people staring, but if you stare on one object, one part of the image, it will stop moving. So we cannot only always trust our senses, but we can improve our senses. We can improve our eyesight. I'm not sure in the future if we can get rid of these kinds of optical illusions, but still, let's talk about our vision. Do you want night vision, for example? There was a group of biohackers, and they experimented with chlorine E6, tiny droplets, that gave them night vision for a couple of hours. Yeah, I don't like the image, but still, it's interesting technology. But I also am fond of the story of Jeroen. Jeroen is a friend of mine. He's also featured in my book. And Jeroen has retina pigmentosa, which meant he became blind at the age of 20. And for a couple of years, he wears these glasses, and there's a tiny camera on the glass, and that's connected to a small computer on the right side of the glasses. And that is connected to a chip inside his eye, and that's connected to the optical nerves in his eye. And now he can see for 60 pixels in black and white again. So he can see, he does not have our full vision like we have, but still he can see more than when he was blind. And what's cool about the story of Jeroen is that he does these amazing things with his eyesight of 60 pixels. For example, he shoots arrows, he does archery, and he also goes skiing in the winter, and he even does these crazy parkour stunts. And every time I watch this video, I still think, oh no, Jeroen, do not do it. Do not go for the jump. But so it's so awesome that with these 60 pixels, he does all these amazing things. So that's a really interesting story. And technically, this is not a human augmentation because this is more the use of technology in a medical field. But what if in one time in the future, maybe bionic eyes are better than biological ones? What will people choose to have a bionic instead of a biological eye? So these are all relevant questions. And that's also the last part of my presentation. What's the impact of these kinds of augmentation technologies? And the first one is I shared the story of Jeroen. But Jeroen is one of the 700 users of the second sight system with the chip implant. But a couple of months ago, the news broke that the company that makes these devices got out of business. So now Jeroen and also his fellow wearers, users of this technology, they have a technology which does not get updated. There are no upgrades. He cannot call customer service anymore. So you must envision it for yourself. Now you have your vision, but you're not sure when you will become blind again. Maybe in 1 hour, maybe in 5 years, maybe in 10 years. So especially when we give these vital skills, vital capabilities like our senses, we hand it over to technology, we also need to be aware of the lifetime maintenance and also updating of these kinds of things, especially in cases like with Jeroen. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is there's more and more debate among technology ethicists about the question, is technology neutral or not? But if you think of the examples I gave, they are a lot about augmentations in the workplace. For example, with the brain-computer interface, can we communicate more seamlessly with computers? And maybe that allows us to work better, to work harder, to work more efficient and effective. So that really makes me think about what's the main purpose of some of these augmentation technologies? Is it that we increase our human flourishing, or are we becoming better employees? We work better. We as a human resource are becoming better. And of course, that idea is not completely new. That made me think of the famous silent comedy movie Modern Times from 1936 with Charlie Chaplin, in which he also criticized the dogma of working in factories and that every facet and every thing that he and his fellow employees did in this factory always needs to be more effective, more efficient, more based on time, so that they as humans are more seen as a sort of resource instead of being human. So that's something to keep in mind when you think about augmentation technology. What's their use case? Who's developing it? And what kind of situations are we using this technology? And the third thing I want to tell you is about, do we also run the risk of losing certain skills? So instead of upgrading ourselves with human augmentation, maybe we are also downgrading certain other aspects. For example, when I was a little boy of 8 years old playing Soldier in the Woods, I remembered a lot of phone numbers because we did not have a mobile phone at the time. And I also could read a map. And right now we have all outsourced these capabilities to our smartphone. I do not need to remember phone numbers anymore or need to read a map anymore. We all have apps for that. So the question is, does it also decrease other human skills? For example, watching an analog clock. Well, let's hope that it will not be our future that we cannot read clocks anymore. So to conclude, I shared some highlights about human augmentation technologies, about implants and brain-computer interfaces and our senses, upgrading our senses. And I think for the future of this terrain, I'm still fascinated by it, and I think we'll see a lot more also being done by Team HART on this domain. And I think we need science and we need technology to upgrade ourselves, but we also, I think, need to think about the moral issues, also about the ethical dilemmas that arise. And for that, I think we also need creativity and fantasy, just like little Peter had when he was 8 years old and he was fired from the army by Richard. Thank you very much.